two. 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. 1 1 2. Test 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. Test 1 2. 1 2. Test 1 2. 1 2. Test 1 2.
And I'm okay with just a, casual waffle. It's okay.
Try it. That's right. Thank
Wait,
you so
what?
much for your help and for hosting this. Did you see what's in that other cup?
doing? Good. Hello. Hello. I think so. Or can you guys hear me okay? Or just a little bit? Hear more of the. How about that? Is that better? All right. So now I got it properly placed. So now you guys know I'm not a professional speaker. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Adrienne Spencer. I serve as the Director of Engagement for a local nonprofit rooted and rising in Washington Park. We focus over in the Washington Park area here in the city of Milwaukee on housing equity, food equity, child care. I spend a lot of time at their homes about the conditions of our community. How can we make it better? What's good about our neighborhood? Improve. Probably have gone in the city of Milwaukee. So want to be able to just kind of have an open discussion with you guys on your experiences, your thoughts, and can do as a collective moving forward and to make. Thank you, guys. It's cool, man. A lot of mom and dad said so today. Good morning, young lady. Okay, all right. Anaya. Excellent. Nice to meet you, Anaya. Red top. Fox Point. So is this the Fox Point click right here? I see how y'all lined y'all chairs together. Let me round you out. Thank you for coming, Daniel. Hi. Excellent. So do all 5 of y'all go to the same school? You're all in 7th grade. You all go to Fox Point, all in the same class as well? Who did I miss? Temple. Okay, my fault. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, gentlemen. Did I miss any? Oh, hey, how you doing? What's your name? Maya Ian? Ian. Nice to meet you. And Mom, hi. She said, I'm with him. He didn't come because Mom said, she came because he said. I like that. Well, thank y'all. And it's cute to see a whole family here enjoying together. Again, I'm Adrienne Spencer. I've lived and worked here in Milwaukee since probably about 1989. So I graduated from Washington High School. I'm a graduate of Concordia University. And I'm a mother of 5. And so I am deeply rooted in the community of Milwaukee. And having a job that serves is something that's very important to me. Hey, ladies, how y'all doing? Welcome, welcome. Can we get a quick introduction from you ladies as you come in? You're not on the spot at all. We just fell into rotation. Hi.
We are 10, 5, 6, 4, right? And the employees are here for
Excellent. And what is your name, young lady? Liliana. Excellent. What grade are you? 7th grade. Welcome. Hello, ladies. Michaels? Ella. Welcome, Ella. Violet? Excellent. And I was going to ask, are you guys also 7th grade? And troop leader?
Jessica.
Nice to meet you, Jessica. Thank you for bringing your ladies to come join us today. All right, y'all, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The presentation itself is not long. It's really designed to drive conversation. There's going to be a couple of really important points, so a few bullet points to walk through, but really designed to get you guys thinking about really the housing structure here in Milwaukee and what really got us to this point today. And what we'll find is that it was designed to be this way. Uh-oh.
2, 1, 2, test 1, 2. Nope.
All right. So one thing I like to do is just definitely start off with a quote, and I'll have a couple of these throughout. If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. Does that make sense? Making sure that we as individuals take our time, our personal time, to find ways that we can be impactful in our community is very important. Hey, how you guys doing? Good. So Martin Luther King encourages us to provide service to our community in the ways in which we can, right? So for Martin Luther King, that started off as being a person that led many individuals down south through a lot of different oppressive situations. But later in life, he started to talk about economic empowerment, about housing inequality, about salary inequalities for folks. And that is what brought his teachings here to Milwaukee, along with other important topics. So in January 26, King and his wife had moved into an apartment in South Chicago. And they did that because they wanted to really understand and experience what the housing inequalities were here in the North, right? So during the Great Migration, when lots of people of color came from South looking for work here to the North, what they found is that they were all kind of squished into really small locations and weren't allowed to live in different areas around the city. That was happening here in Milwaukee, but also in Chicago. So King and his wife lived in Chicago for a time so that they can experience and also so that they can advocate for better housing for folks here in the North, if that makes sense. In August of 2067, here in Milwaukee, the NAACP Youth Council, they were listening to Dr. King. They were hearing about the inequities around the United States as it pertains to housing and experiencing it here personally, here in Milwaukee, where families could not rent, right on 27th and Burleigh, if you can believe. People of color could not rent homes just in 1967, right? Not too far ago. And this made them say, we really need to support the call of then Councilwoman Val R. Phillips, who was at the time working to pass a housing law, a fair housing law here in Milwaukee through the city of Milwaukee. So these kids got together with Father Grappi, and they did 200 nights of marching. And they marched from the north side to the south side and downtown as a way to bring awareness to the city, to the legislators about the inequities in housing here in the city of Milwaukee. So as that was occurring in December, King publicly revealed his plan to organize mass civil disobedience in Washington, D.C. And then in March, King led a march of 6,000 protesters in support of striking sanitation workers. And again, this all goes to his fight to make sure that inequalities in both pay and housing were starting to be addressed. At first, it was just about voters' rights, right? And that was hard enough. But when we started talking about the economic impact that people of color were being, they weren't being able to have access to fair pay or to housing that was high quality or in spaces where they wanted to be. So he began to focus on that work. In April, King was shot in 1968. He was then shot dead and assassinated. And then in April of the following year, that is when President Johnson then passed the Fair Housing Act. So it took an act of death in order for our president to then act on a request that King had been trying to push forward for several years. Only after that did our own city council approve Val R. Phillips' attempt to get a housing get a housing law passed here in Milwaukee after 7 attempts where she was the only person to vote for it. And once we got a change out of council people, then she was able to get that law passed here in Milwaukee, but only after the federal law was passed. So that is something that is really amazing to me as a person that was not, here in Milwaukee during that time, not even alive during that time, to understand the process in which it had went through in order to get housing even available to folks, right? And on paper to say, yes, people should be able to live where they want to live. But what we then found out is that the stage was set and that regardless of what was written into law, there were secret laws that were written called covenants, right? That still kept people out of specific areas and redlining that occurred that did not allow for people to buy in certain areas, if that makes sense, right? Any questions or comments or, yes?
Well, yeah, I might want to deep into redlining districts a little more because I don't know that everybody totally understands that.
Yeah.
shall not be legal for people of color to own property in the Bay Ridge neighborhood, which, you know, if I know a lot of kids have never heard the term, but it is a term within the community, White Folks Bay.
Yeah.
If you ever heard anyone say that, it ties back to many, many years of history of segregation and racism, and I never knew that until maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think, that's really, it's really a tragic part of our history that when you, especially like Milwaukee, it's a pretty huge area, right? And there's roughly 17 kind of suburbs that wrap around Milwaukee or are partially composed of Milwaukee, right? Your Fox Bays, is that right? Fox Bay? Fox Point, Whitefish Bay, all of those areas, Brown Deer even, Oak Creek, Franklin, all of those are like Milwaukee County and Milwaukee originally, right? But then they all became their own subdivisions. Each and every last one of those, including Waukesha, Wauwatosa, West Allis, all have covenants, some of which still stand today and don't even expire until the end of this year. And specifically say, it would be interesting, like homework for you guys, get with your parents, look up the original deed to your home, and see if it has a covenant on it. See if it has a covenant on it. Yes, ma'am. You got that right. Right. And they could live there. They could cohabitate. So they could not, like, you could not, me as an owner, and I love my employee, and I want to gift her my home because she's been amazing. I want to leave it to her in my will. I would be unable to do that legally. Unable. If I am not a white person, if I am Latino, if I'm Asian, if I am black, I was excluded from living, whether it was a homeowner or a renter, in 17 neighborhoods. So if you ever look around and see why Milwaukee is as segregated as it is by design. It's strictly by design. So that was one way. That's one systematic issue. Yes, ma'am.
I worked as a local media news service previously to the 60s and the 50s, where he could not leave a certain area of Milwaukee without having to know his employer telling him that he was allowed to go out of a certain area in Milwaukee. Absolutely defined by matters.
And that was still pretty, even though it wasn't like law, it was still pretty prevalent. Even when I was a kid here in the very early 80s, we weren't allowed to like cross the bridge and go to the south side, right? So like to go swimming at Kosciuszko Park was a situation back in the early 80s, right? So that was a remnant of that statute where folks had to just kind of stay. They wanted to kind of keep them all in one area so we can just kind of keep an eye on them, and whatever they do in their neighborhood is what they do in their neighborhood, but we can't have them leaking out all over the community, right? So that was, a very real, very restrictive ordinance that was placed on people of color primarily. And that's also why you see a large number of Latino families that lived on the south side for decades, literally up until like the last couple of years, have people from the south side start to kind of migrate, north here. But this is why, because these covenants were put in place to kind of keep people of the same race in the same areas and to really keep white folks isolated from people of color as far as the city of Milwaukee was concerned. But it wasn't just happening here in Milwaukee, of course. It was happening all over the nation. These were federally enforced covenants, y'all. So they were all over the United States. So those are some interesting things. I would definitely challenge you guys to take a look. Yes, ma'am? Yep, I would challenge you guys to take a look at the deeds to your home. So if you are a homeowner, And even if you don't own your home, you can just look it up online. It's just it's open knowledge. And you'll be able to see, wow, 40 years ago, I would not have been able to live in this place. Or my friend would not be able to live in this place, right? So you guys right here, can you imagine not being able to be friends with, what was your name again? Yes, what's your name? Chaz. Can you guys imagine not being able to be friends with Chaz? Like, you know him today. You can't imagine that, can you? No way, right? Can you imagine not being able to be friends with these guys? Right? Like the way y'all aligned y'all chairs, let me know y'all a click, right? So to come between y'all because of a law, it feels wrong, right? It is.
So if anyone's interested in pursuing this even further, there is a project out of UW Milwaukee where they ask for people who we call them citizen scientists to systematically go through deeds and covenants in different neighborhoods to check for language and do it from your own house or with your service hours, stuff like that. So if you find an interest in this history and want to do something about it, this is a way.
Absolutely.
But let me just jump real quickly. So the red line districts, I just want to make sure like everybody understands. They literally just took a map. Obviously, it was intentional. Are you getting into it? Okay, all right,
I am. So two different things that are occurring, right? You have these covenants that prevent folks from purchasing or renting in specific spaces. But then another level is the red line that occurs, and that's going to be coming up in a second. So the stage has already been set. The Milwaukee metro area has been consistently ranked as one of the most segregated areas in the country to this day, right? Intentional practices by homeowners, developers, banks, and the government to create segregated spaces as we see them in Milwaukee. So we're going to get into that government part right now. Policies and practices by these entities created a two-tier system of home ownership that granted advantages to white families while keeping people of color from gaining access to home ownership and the generational wealth that goes along with it. So that's important to think about. When we think about folks that are consistently struggling, do not have the leverage in order to A, send their kids to college or educate themselves, or the leverage to take money out, equity out of their homes in order to either invest or to educate or to buy other properties or just to simply for emergency purposes, right? It is because folks have been prevented from being able to do those, to purchase a home and build that generational wealth that comes along with home ownership. Oops, keep pushing the wrong button there, y'all. So I wanted to just show you this map right quick. This map shows like how this is all of Milwaukee County right here. And this looks at like what the population is, right? So only this area right here, which as you can imagine is your northwest side of Milwaukee, is 80% of the population is black. Wrapped around that is pretty mixed here, pretty mixed. But then once you get there, once you get outside of the city of Milwaukee limits proper, 80% white. And there's literally, and that's 80% or greater, I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to put the little line under there. But 80% or greater is white. Here, they say there's not a percentage that is dominant, but here is 80% or greater black population in the city of Milwaukee there. So August 28th, 1962, Father Grappi and the NAAC Youth Council decide to start their marches. 200 days of marching to focus on housing inequalities and bring attention to the legislator so that they can make changes to those different covenants and also to the redlining that is happening in Milwaukee. What people are saying is that banks and also the federal government is not allowing for people of color to take out loans to purchase homes. So you guys may or may not be familiar with the different like housing structures that are in Milwaukee, but when you think about West Lawn is currently a housing housing authority property right now that is marketed to low to moderate income families. Originally, that property was built for white, middle income veterans to live in as a way for them to own those homes within 20 years. However, the Great Migration came, and it became the solution for where to send all of the black people that were pouring in from the South. So they went from a model of 20-year ownership to rental, right? So again, removing that opportunity. So there were grants that were available to folks to purchase homes. There were down payment assistance, even though they didn't call it that back then, for these homes over in the housing authority there. And they took that away and they said, this is now going to be one of the locations where we're going to place folks of color. And then they started to build more of those like Hillside and I don't even know the name of the third one. That's a little bit further south. Something Berryland. I think that might be right. Berryland. So the problem though is that they took away the ability for families to own those spaces, the same opportunity that was previously presented to their white counterparts. So therefore removing the ability to create financial wealth for themselves. So 200 days of marching. I'm just gonna keep pressing that wrong button. So from 1960, the black population in Milwaukee exploded by over 600% from 1960 to the 2000s with folks that moved up from the north and landed here in Milwaukee and were forced into this very small section of the Northwest Milwaukee area. So we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. And the reason I thought it was important to slide this quote in, one, I feel like it's one that we don't hear enough of from MLK, but also because it helps us to understand like where we are now in comparison to where the NAACP Youth Council was in 1967, right? We are fighting today for the same rights, for the same abilities, for the same access that our counterparts were fighting for in 1967. We should not lose hope. We should continue to fight. We should continue to gather our resources, continue to gather our partners so that we have a better understanding of what the need is and how we as a collective can move forward and really tear down these systemic systems that keep us in the same places with one group here and one group there, one group with access, one group without, one group available to build family wealth and one without. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. How can I plug in? How can I support? One way is to learn more, because if we know more, then we know what to look out for and what we can help to discourage in the future. And this might be way down the road, right? It might be you guys that are the ones that fix this. But the way that you can do that is because now you know what you didn't know before, right? Uh-oh. That went fast. Back one. All right. So Milwaukee's black home ownership rate is just 27%. It is the absolute second lowest in the entire nation. And again, that goes to the fact that Milwaukee has been redlined in a way that prevents home ownership for people that are black and Latino. Latinos have a much better percentage of home ownership right here in Milwaukee, but folks of black families are by far discriminated against by banks, by realtors, and by developers. And so it becomes that much more difficult for one to acquire a home and to create that financial wealth that everybody deserves, right? Any questions or comments so far? Very quiet crowd. All right. So in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I thought this was an important Martin Luther King message because if we know nothing, that is one thing, right? But if we know, but we don't act, that is different, right? So today's conversation is really about educating each other, about learning about things that we may not have had access to in the past, and about thinking about what can we do differently in the future in order to A, curb this type of systematic oppression, or B, stop it altogether, preferably, right? So things that you can do, having conversations with friends and family about what you learned today, right? So some people might say, man, I never heard of that before. That sounds strange. Let me look it up. It does sound strange, but it's quite true. So I would encourage folks to take some time and look it up. And I know when I first started learning about covenants, I went down a rabbit hole, seriously. I mean, I wanted to look up everything. I looked up my own home. It had a covenant on it. I've only owned my home for 2 years, but it was a home that had a covenant on it. When I looked up a home of my friends, it had a covenant on it. And I'm like, these are houses that are right in the city of Milwaukee, I live on 27th and I live on 24th and McKinley. And there was a covenant on my home. So I would not have been able to purchase that home 40 years ago, right? So it's amazing to just learn how extensive the restrictions were. Grant Street, one of our residents, we looked up her home. Grant Street, the whole entire block, literally had a covenant on it up until the 2000s. The 2000s. West Alice's covenant doesn't expire until the end of this year. It just means that right now, people aren't legally enforcing those laws. But I can tell you that as a young person living here in Milwaukee, I felt when I went to West Alice or when I went to Waukesha to go to the county fair, you could feel the tension of a colored person being in the space. Then you could feel it, as in, I come from Arkansas, and county fairs are a big deal, you know? So I was excited to be able to go to the county fair here and see some cows and some horses and some rides and some food. And I was like, when you get there, you know, people are quite different to you. And I didn't understand as a child what that was, and as a teenager rather, right? I didn't understand what that was. Not until I became an adult and read about these covenants did it all start to click and make it like, oh, wow, really? That's what was going on, you know? But change has happened, and we want to continue to encourage more change. So having those conversations with friends and families on what you learned today is important. Learn more. Visit your library. Visit the Google. Look and see what it says. You will be amazed what you can find. Most of the information that I presented here today, I pulled from our friends at the Redress Movement. So if you guys are looking for ways to get involved, the Redress Movement is a movement here in Milwaukee, Denver, and South Carolina. And their goal is to really get the government to acknowledge, apologize, and in some form or way to address the inequalities that have happened because of redlining. So because people weren't able to purchase properties, because they were kept away from being able to create family wealth. And one of the things that we're working on currently, I'm a part of that as well, is to create a housing, both a county and a city housing committee. All right? And that's going to look at equality across the county of Milwaukee, so not just the city of Milwaukee. So we're looking at, is there affordable homes across the diaspora, both for rental and for home ownership, in all communities for people of color and not. So making it equal for everyone so that folks aren't judged or turned away because they use some type of voucher like Section 8, or making it exuberant so that a person can't live there if their rent is 3.5, 4 times their rent amount and their income doesn't meet that. Where does one go? When you think about teenagers moving out, they don't. They live in their parents' basements because they can't afford to live alone. They don't have 3 to 4 times the rent that is required to move into their own apartments. So they either have to have 3 or 4 people living in a place, or I stay at home with mom and dad, right? So those are things that are put in place as barriers to keep people out of those spaces. Give your time. Yes, yes.
I think it's also really important to understand that even though the legal landscape is arguably better, I think you could argue the economic landscape is worse.
It is.
Because most people don't realize, but even with all the restrictive covenants, even with the prohibitions on ownership, Milwaukee did have a pretty good history of employers such as Masterlock and Power Automotive that did employ black people.
Yes.
And there was a fairly thriving black middle class until those places left in the 80s and 90s. So even though the legal barriers are gone, they've been replaced with potentially
Economic barriers. Absolutely, that's a great point. Not only has the economic barriers been a huge issue, but also the displacement of folks of color that had thriving communities. So when you think about the development of the Hillside apartment complex and the I-94 corridor and the 43, all of those, if you look at the map, if I go back to that map there, they ran straight through all of the north side. As you know, they run right through all of the north side communities here. I feel like this is the good one. Yeah. So like literally 94 runs straight through this north side right here. I took it to get here today. 43, thank you. 43 runs straight through the north side community here, and 94 runs straight through Walnut and Locust, which was a thriving community called Bronzeville, where people of color had amazing businesses, beautiful homes. It was a really thriving community that was displaced without really only one neighborhood that survived, which was Halyard Park. And it's still a predominantly black community today, just east of where that road, where the 2 highways started there off of North Avenue. But because of that, folks that actually had built wealth, bless you, folks that actually had built some family wealth, did have some businesses, were then displaced, and they were not able to then open up businesses in new places because of those covenants that were restricted. And I read a covenant on a building the other day that also said this, that no building will be rented, will be sold, will be used for business purposes by any person other than someone that is white, for no reason. So for business either. So that means I have to practice out of my home, or I have to close down altogether if it's not something that can be maintained out of my home. Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to jump on that point. I think a lot of people don't realize that, and it wasn't just Milwaukee, but I think it was in the 60s when they started the whole U.S. freeway system.
Yeah.
You study it, all the freeways, pretty much in a lot of cities in the U.S.
Run
were
straight
all
through colored
designed
neighborhoods.
to segregate the population. Milwaukee, I mean, if you look at it, it was all designed for the white people to live on this side and the black people to live on this side. But you can go to Detroit and Chicago and
Same thing
many other
exists.
cities across the country, and it was all designed to continue segregation.
The same thing exists throughout. So we can say they're consistent, that's for certain. They are. Doop, doop, doop. Doop. All right, what else might one do? Give your time to help doing housing surveys. So there's another coalition, the RON Coalition, Reclaiming Our Neighborhood. Last year I had 7 teens that came out to do housing surveys with the adults. And what you learn through that process is how to look at your community in a different way. And they did assessments, very simple, use a laptop or an iPad rather, and you look at the conditions of the home. And the purpose of doing that is to connect the individuals that live in those homes to resources that are currently available through the city, through the neighborhood, through the state, to help them to improve their living situations, right? So sometimes that is focused on the family, but more often than not through this process, it is focused on the actual physical building. So if you're thinking about ways to get involved, Run Coalition if you like to be out in the community and talking and you want to learn more about the structures. Redress Movement if you are looking like, I can do transcripts from home. I'm a homebody. I'm really tech savvy. I can do some research. That's pretty easy to do. Or coming out and having conversations with folks. All of those are ways in which you can decide, yep, I'd like to be more involved, I'd like to learn more, and I'd like to be able to share this with folks that I know. And then lift your voice to advocate for housing equality, right? So there are tons of ways for folks to either A, join up with folks like, I talked about that housing committee that is currently being put forward. They're gonna be looking for folks, residents, teens and adults from across the county of Milwaukee that care about housing equality. And the goal is to look at how to make sure everyone has access to high quality, affordable, safe housing, and healthy. I should say healthy too, super important. Some of the things that we find while we're doing those housing surveys is that folks have mold in their home and don't know it and can't understand why they're having respiratory problems. Or they have, lead, high lead levels, and don't understand like how that's affecting their children directly. So all of these things are really important health concerns that connect to your housing that people don't think about on a day-to-day basis. So there's a ton of different ways that folks can decide to get engaged. But if any of these sound interesting to you, please see me after. I'll be happy to give you information for Ms. Dynasty Caesar for the Redress Movement. You can talk to me about the Run Coalition. And if there's other things that you guys are interested in, I'm more than happy to share. But I do also understand that a lot of you guys are just fresh back off of a trip. Hi. So anything that you heard here today connect with what you might have heard on your trip, or does it spark anything for you? What's your name? Noah, nice to meet you. Noah, what grade are you in? Excellent. All right, so you are ready, primed and ready for college, huh? Almost, almost. So anything you hear today connect with what you heard or what you learned on your trip?
I went to Alabama. It wasn't really as much as been taught by you. But we heard a lot about like lynchings that happened around, especially the South. It's primarily based off the South. So yeah, we learned about a lot of like the injustices and lynchings that happened yesterday. I mean, you guys were here to hear it.
Let it rip.
Went to a memorial down in Birmingham, Alabama, the National Memorial for
Run up here, Noah.
Peace and Justice.
Right. If I can figure out how to get off.
And
That's
basically,
how you know I'm not a speaker. I don't mind sharing the stage just like that. Boom.
and so at the memorial, there were like these like a vast grid of pillars and columns that are made out of metal, and I thought that originally each pillar just represented one person that was lynched. However, as I got closer, I noticed that each pillar represented a different county in which people were lynched, and so there's like hundreds of these pillars, and each one had like up to 30 names on it, which was I thought was crazy.
Thank you for sharing, Noah. So, I'm going to ask you another creepy question. When you looked at those pillars and realized that, wow, this is not a person, this is dozens of people in each of these counties, how did that make you feel? And I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but some lynching also occurred here in Milwaukee. And the story of Mr. Grover is a prime example of that. This gentleman was here in Milwaukee. He was found, he had escaped the South and come here to Milwaukee, and he was hiding out here, but someone did notify the authorities and let them know where he was. So they did, in fact, carry out the same lynching here in Milwaukee. People think that it didn't happen in the North, But they did, in fact, lynch him here in Milwaukee as well. So it's really, disheartening to like learn the history of our country and some of the things that we have done to each other. So it's really encouraging for me to be in a space like this with lots of different people of different ages, different races, to talk about really important issues like this, and to really gauge like where people are in 2024. Wow, I just said that right. It's 2024, y'all, already. So I hope that what I've been able to share with you all today got like a light bulb tweaking. And I know I'm the type of person that I like to listen and then research, like, wait, what? Let me check that out. I'm that person, right? So this is a lot of information, so I can understand why people are like, not like, ooh, me, unless you already like have some context on this, right? But if there's any thoughts that folks have, I'd love to hear if you guys have any thoughts on what you've learned today. Yes, ma'am. So much.
A speaker that I heard speaking this topic, a professor at UWI, on this issue, he said, wanted to remind everybody this is a hearts and minds issue. And no matter what law we pass, no matter what we do, those covenants will still be there in certain people's hearts. And that it is our job to work on the hearts and minds of people and to spread that through each other and to learn about each other and to hear about each other. And really, it's our personal that we need to do. It's hearts and minds. We need never change it with laws because they will ever, somebody will come up with some way to take money away or to restrict access. But if we know in our hearts, we teach it to our children, we teach it to our friends, that's the most important.
It's the most impactful thing that can be done, right?
Right. And I also wanted to put out another plug for the book of MLK.
Yes.
Have you ever read that? And so if that's another book I think that's very accessible, and it was written about Milwaukee
Yep, in particular.
specifically. And I know when I was reading it, I was like, well, my goodness, that's 3 blocks away from where I grew up. There's, they've mentioned, Sender and all these different streets and that the book is about evictions in Milwaukee County. The sociologist came and spent time living here in Milwaukee and really researching and learning from people who were being evicted, and also how that ties into so much, again, of our rental culture and how much power landlords have over people, and that changes lives, especially as a teacher. I know having students that would just all of a sudden like disappear. Where did they go, right? And kids bouncing from school to school to school because they don't have that stability to be able to live, and that is so important. So if you're interested in reading about it, the book talks about really what the messages of our community and both the sins of our past and
Currently. Absolutely. When I read Eviction, I was like, is this about me? Seriously, I grew up here in the 80s. We migrated here from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And for a while, I wasn't quite sure about like what was happening in my life. I felt like I had a hard time, speaking and reading because from a very young age, I thought we migrated with the seasons. Like we would be here in Milwaukee during the summer and like into when the first snow falls, and then we get in the car with chicken in the trunk and a blanket across the 4 kids, and my mom would haul us back to Arkansas. And we lived that life up until I remember the year 1989 was when we put down roots here in Milwaukee and stayed. But that did not prevent us from moving from house to house, what seemed like every 6 to 9 months. Can you guys imagine that? Having to pack your bedroom up and move every 6 to 9 months? Can you imagine that? I don't even want to pack what's in the refrigerator. It's difficult, right? And just think about that like as a child, even as an adult, needing to reconnect, needing to find a job, needing to get resources that your family can utilize. Every 6 to 9 months, yes. 100%. I feel like 100%. And for those that couldn't hear, she said she felt like you would feel lonely because you never have the opportunity to establish connection with folks. That was me. I would be out of school. By the time I really got to know folks, it was time to go to another school. Just like you said. Teachers would say, oh, you have so much promise, and then you'd be gone to another place, right? And now you're starting all over. You're back in your box. You're quiet. You're a recluse, and you're trying to get to know people. It was hard, right? That's still happening today, right now. Kids that aren't able, families rather, that aren't able to afford rent, or they have landlords that have them living in deplorable conditions. Deplorable. I met a gentleman the other day whose apartment building has not had heat for 5 weeks. Now keep in mind, it's been a pretty mild winter. It's been a pretty mild winter this year. But to think about having an apartment that hasn't had heat for 5 weeks in December and January in Wisconsin, that is ridiculous. Yes, sir.
One thing we also in the city of the county of Milwaukee, there was the 220 program,
Schooling.
which was a program that gave kids an opportunity from the inner cities to, they literally paid for them to be bused to Nicolay High School, where I went, or Mapledale, or MLK
Brown deer. Mm-hmm.
all across the suburbs, and it was a great way to integrate people. And I'll be honest, so one of my good friends, Black, I met, I think, second grade, like, and I'm still friends with him, and he's in business, construction business.
Mm-hmm.
I've since realized, like, I wouldn't have met somebody of color
If
until
not for that
probably high school if that program didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that program, Scott Walker killed that program 5 years ago or something like that.
Longer.
It's
Longer.
Okay. Sorry.
Longer.
But it just, if you could talk about how that's influenced, how that program has influenced education in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I can do a little bit on that. So the 220 program was really meant to try to reintegrate schools because a lot of the inner city schools that in Milwaukee proper are predominantly Black, depending upon what neighborhood you're in. But what is very, very clear is that most white families chose to send their children to school at either public schools or rural schools, right? So private, religious, but they didn't want them to be in the Milwaukee public schools. So those families, again, when the great kind of white flight occurred, when folks left the city of Milwaukee in mass numbers, that also took away lots of resources. So tax is what pays for schools, right? Took that away. So they decided, and I'm not quite sure who, they decided, okay, we're going to try to reintegrate schools and bring some kids that are Black or Latino out to suburban schools and vice versa. But let me tell y'all this. It did not go that way because there were not many, if any, white kids that were bused in to city schools at all. So it didn't go the way that it was designed to go. But there were hundreds of kids of color that were bused out to suburban schools. And I can tell you what I know from my friends that have attended school. It was a very difficult situation for them because they're thrust into a new environment where they are one of one, right? And they have teachers that are not culturally aware or competent in a way in order to really teach those children who are coming from a background where they did not receive the same type of education that their peers, who they are now put in place with, right? So it was difficult for folks to basically catch up, if you will, right? Even though they did try to cherry pick and pick high-performing students to send out, it was still such a vast difference in what the educational systems were that it was difficult for those kids to assimilate to those schools and to those cultures and such. And plus, there was no representation in those spaces for them. They would have to wake up and take buses for hours to get to those schools. So they're at a disadvantage in that way because they have to take an hour or two to get to school and an hour or two to get home from school. Does that make sense? Does that sound like fun? Do y'all want to add an extra hour of travel time both ways after homework or after basketball practice? No, right? It does not sound good. So this went on for probably about, I want to say maybe 15, maybe 10, 15 years is about what I'm thinking it was. It was probably the whole time that I was in middle school through high school. So about, I must have been very, very, very bad if I was in middle school and high school that long. So maybe a little bit longer, right? A little bit longer. But the outcome is that, you know, according to people that I know, friends that I know, like Dynasty Caesar, who runs the redress movement here in Milwaukee, even though she definitely felt like it was a very high quality education that she received, what she had to endure in order to receive it, the checks and balances don't weigh out for her as an adult. Does that make sense? But on the positive side, to Brett's point, it was the only opportunity for people of color and for young white people to engage each other at that time because it just wasn't happening in other spaces. There was no other way for you guys to connect, right? So that was the positive that came out of it, the relationship building that happened amongst those youth that were the ones who participated in those programs. But outside of that, minimal, which is, I don't know if that's why they discontinued. I think it was the dollars a situation with funding. And also, people started to say, hey, what is the benefit of me having my kid go all the way out 2 hours away to go to school? And it's difficult for me as a parent to get off from work and go to a parent-teacher conference meeting 2 hours away from home and from work. All of those things, right? So many different systematic issues and barriers that were put in place, even those that were meant to be helpful, sometimes end up being harmful in ways, right? So just thinking about the different ways, like we have these freedoms now, right? We have the freedoms to choose, like who we sit with at lunch, whose house we get to go over, where we get to live to a certain extent, right? Those are things that were void of folks before us 20, 30, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, you know, so not very long. Most of us have grandparents that lived through this and can talk to you more about it. And it might be worth your time to sit down and have some cookies and milk with grandma and grandpa and say, hey, tell me about such and such. And it might be an uncomfortable conversation at first, but I'm sure that they'll be willing to get into it with you if you tell them why you want to learn more about it. You know what I mean? For me, having those conversations with my grandparents down south was very different. We talked about their time as sharecroppers. So I am one generation away from sharecropping. Can you believe that? Which means my grandparents, my great-grandparents were in fact slaves. So I think that it's important for us to have those conversations with our grandparents when we have the ability to do so. And our parents, because they have some knowledge as well. I can remember stuff from the 70s and the 80s it's amazing what you remember when you're a small child. So that brings me to a wrap, unless you guys have any other thoughts, any other comments. I want to say thank you to all of you all for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I hope that there was something new, something interesting that you all might have learned, or something that will just inspire you guys to start having more conversations, if nothing else. Thank y'all so much.
So thank you so much to Miss Adrian. We met at Redress. I'm Rhonda Ligner. I'm the educator for Tikkun Ha'ir. Thanks so much to Brett for this idea of bringing Kids Impact Community to Temple of Love from Congregation Shalom. Thank you, Adrian, for coming. And this has been fabulous. And thank you most importantly to all the teens who came here today. This is a day off for you, and thank you for making it a day off. So I know, Miss Adrian, you're going to hang around? Yeah. So what we have here in this very small space, thank you, Brent, for moving us, is a couple of different service projects. Here at Community here, we believe in social justice, understanding the roots of systemic problems. We believe in social action. What are the few things that we can do to help people in difficult conditions, but most importantly, learn how we can change the situation? So thank you for that, Adrian. What we have are 3 different projects, but I have to say I don't really understand one of them. The first project is creating gift bags for, oh, hi, Rabbi. The first project is creating gift bags for people who are in homeless situations and need a little bit of help with entertaining their children and being safe and secure themselves. Our second project is a no-tie blanket. Lexi, our volunteer here, can explain it to those of you who don't know what the no-tie blanket. And the next one is, I'm going to see if I can, it's a mat. Right, but I don't understand how to put it together. I'm going to see if we can get a Kids Impact community member to help us with that. I'm going to be at the table with the gift bag, and Rachel and Lexi can help with the no-tie blankets, and also for those of you, moms and dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone here, any adult here, to Community here is also doing a gift card drive. And if you need a blanket in $10 increments, please find me and I will show you the person who is helping us run that gift card drive. Here, I'm going to stop now so people can talk to you on their own and do some projects. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And Rachel, you guys remember that?
Perhaps we can move chairs out of the way. So you fold them and cut them. I will get some more help. This off the table and you the table. Yeah, makes sense. Totally. Get some of the chairs out of the way.
Help stack them. Stacking them.
Yeah, that's fine. Or just creating space for
Yeah.
people to work.
Okay, we'll just
Flip them over.
in case they need to.
We're making these plastic bags. Yeah, this is like a mantle. So basically, a bag. We are saving. I'm not saving yet. I'm gonna try to get some more help. But here's kind of the. Here, let me put this on the